When Ash becomes home. Eliza Moore had walked through fire once and survived. But the town of Red Creek didn't care about survival. They cared about reputation. When she stumbled into their dusty square that June afternoon, ash still staining her hem and grief carved into every line of her face, no one offered water. No one offered shade. They offered only silence and shuttered doors. She had lost everything, her home, her child, her name. The sun beat down merciless and white, baking the clay road beneath her boots, and Eliza Moore sat down on a bench at the edge of decency and waited for the world to decide her fate. If you're ready to walk this journey with Eliza, through judgment, through storms, through the kind of second chances earned in dust and defiance, then settle in. This is a story about what it means to build a home when the world says you don't deserve one. And when you reach the end, hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see just how far Eliza's story travels. Now, let's begin. The sun had no mercy in Red Creek, Wyoming, and neither did its people. Eliza Moore felt both truths settle into her bones as she stood at the edge of the town square, her shadow pooling short and black beneath her boots. The journey from Cheyenne had taken 3 days by coach and another half day on foot after the driver refused to bring her any closer. Her trunk, what little remained of her former life, sat abandoned 2 miles back where the road forked. She couldn't carry it. Couldn't carry much of anything anymore. The ash on her skirt had faded from black to gray during the walk, but it was still visible. Still there. A permanent stain that soap and scrubbing had failed to erase, just like the rest of it. She'd tried. The town spread before her in shades of brown and sun-bleached wood. False-fronted buildings lined a wide dirt street, a mercantile, a smithy, a saloon with painted letters peeling in the heat. Ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of place where people came to disappear or start over, depending on what they were running from. Eliza wasn't sure which category she fell into anymore. A woman in a blue calico dress paused on the boardwalk across the street, one hand shading her eyes. She stared for a long moment, then turned sharply and disappeared into the general store. The door swung shut behind her with a deliberate click. Eliza didn't move. She'd expected this. Hoped against it, maybe, but expected it all the same. A woman traveling alone, no husband, no family, no letter of introduction. It was enough to draw suspicion in any frontier town. Add the ash, the hollowed eyes, the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking, and suspicion became certainty. She was trouble, the kind decent people crossed the street to avoid. A man in a leather apron emerged from the smithy, wiping his hands on a rag. He glanced her way, frowned, then ducked back inside. Moments later, a curtain shifted in the window of a neat white house at the far end of the street. Watching. Always watching. Eliza's throat tightened. She should have kept walking, should have bypassed Red Creek entirely, and continued west to some nameless mining camp where questions weren't asked and pasts didn't matter. But her feet had blistered through her stockings, her canteen had run dry an hour ago, and the heat pressing down from the cloudless sky felt thick enough to drown in. So she'd stopped, and now she didn't know how to start again. Her gaze drifted to a bench beneath the awning of the general store, weathered wood, streaked with bird droppings, but shaded. Her legs made the decision before her mind could argue. She crossed the dusty street, boots scuffing soft in the dirt, and lowered herself onto the bench with a slowness that came from exhaustion deeper than physical. The shade felt like a small mercy. She closed her eyes and let her head tip back against the rough planks. The town moved around her in muted rhythms, hoofbeats, a hammer ringing somewhere distant, voices too low to distinguish words. No one approached. No one spoke. Eliza didn't expect them to. She'd been invisible for months now. First in the aftermath, when neighbors stopped meeting her eyes and conversations died the moment she entered a room. Then in the legal offices where men in dark suits explained in patient, condescending tones that she had no claim, no rights, no recourse. And finally on the westbound coach, where passengers shifted away from her as though grief were contagious. Invisibility was safer than scrutiny, but it was also cold. "Miss?" The voice was small and cautious, pulling Eliza from the gray drift of her thoughts. She opened her eyes. 2 girls stood before her, barefoot and sun-browned, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Identical in every way that mattered. Same corn silk hair hanging in tangled braids, same faded blue dresses too short at the hem, same pale eyes studying her with unsettling directness. Twins. "Miss, are you sick?" the one on the left asked. "Lila, don't," the other whispered, tugging at her sister's sleeve. Lila ignored her. "You look sick. Pa says when people sit too long in the sun without water, they get heat stroke and their brains scramble like eggs." Despite everything, Eliza felt the ghost of a smile tug at her mouth. "I'm not sick." "You sure?" Lila tilted her head. "You've been sitting here near an hour. Has it been that long?" "Yes, ma'am." The quieter twin, May, Eliza guessed, spoke so softly it was almost a whisper. "We've been watching from the store." "Watching me?" "Everyone's watching you," Lila said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Calloway says you must be running from something. Mr. Tate says you're probably a widow looking for a new husband. Pa says it's none of our business and we should leave you be, but—" "Lila!" May's face flushed pink. Lila shrugged. "Well, it's true." Eliza looked from one girl to the other, these small wild creatures with dirt under their nails and honesty in their eyes, and felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, softening. "Your pa sounds like a wise man," she said quietly. "He's all right." Lila squinted up at the sun, then back at Eliza. "You got a porch?" The question was so unexpected that Eliza blinked. "I'm sorry?" "A porch. You know, with a roof and maybe a rocking chair. Somewhere you can sit that's not this bench." No, I don't." "You got people here? Family?" "No." "A job?" "No." Lila exchanged a look with May, some silent twin language Eliza couldn't interpret. Then she nodded once, decision made. "You should come home with us." Eliza's breath caught. "What?" "Just for supper," May added quickly, her voice still barely above a whisper. "We got plenty, and our porch has shade." "I can't." "Why not?" Lila folded her arms across her thin chest. "You hungry?" "That's not the point." "Are you?" Eliza hesitated. She'd eaten the last of her bread that morning, stale and dry, washed down with creek water that tasted of minerals and silt. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago, resigned to emptiness. "Yes," she admitted. Then it settled. Lila grabbed her hand with the confidence of someone unaccustomed to refusal. "Come on, it's not far." May took her other hand, gentler but no less insistent. And Eliza, who had nowhere to go, no plan beyond surviving the next hour, the next breath, let herself be led. The row house sat a quarter-mile beyond town, where the road narrowed to a wagon track, and the land opened into rolling grassland dotted with sage. It was a simple structure, single-story, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and prairie grass, a stone chimney at one end. A porch wrapped around the front, shaded by an overhang of weathered planks. Chickens pecked in the dirt yard. A milk cow stood hip-shot in a small corral, tail flicking at flies. Modest, hard-earned, lived in. "Pa!" Lila called as they approached. "We brought company." A man emerged from the barn, leading a rangy sorrel horse. He stopped when he saw them, hand still on the lead rope, and his expression shifted from mild curiosity to something harder. Ethan Rowe was not a man built for gentleness. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his frame lean from labor, his face weathered by sun and wind until it looked carved from the same granite as the mountains on the horizon. Dark hair, streaked with early gray. Eyes the color of winter sky, pale and assessing. He wore work-stained trousers and a collarless shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He looked at Eliza the way a man looks at a stray dog that might bite. "Girls," he said quietly. "What did I tell you about bothering strangers?" "We didn't bother her, Pa," Lila protested. "She was just sitting in town all alone and she doesn't have a porch or supper or anything, so we invited her." "You invited her?" It seemed like the right thing to do. Ethan's jaw worked. He tied the horse to a post and crossed the yard in long strides, stopping a few feet from Eliza. Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the set of his mouth, The way he held himself, controlled, careful, like a man who'd learned not to waste energy on things he couldn't fix. "Miss," he said, voice flat, "I apologize for my daughters. They mean well, but they don't understand that I'm not welcome here," Eliza finished. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Rowe. I'll go." She turned, but May's hand tightened on hers. "Please don't," the girl whispered. Something flickered across Ethan's face, brief, unguarded. He looked at his daughters, then back at Eliza, and exhaled slowly through his nose. "It's near sundown," he said. "Town's a long walk in the dark, and there's coyotes on the road this time of year." He paused. "You're welcome to supper, one meal, then I'll drive you back in the wagon come morning." It wasn't kindness, it was practicality, duty. Eliza recognized the difference. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once, curt, and gestured toward the house. "Girls, set another plate." Lila whooped and dragged May toward the door. Eliza followed more slowly, aware of Ethan's gaze on her back. Watchful, wary, waiting for her to prove his suspicions right. She couldn't blame him. She'd have done the same. Odds? Inside, the house was dim and spare. One main room served as kitchen and living space, with a cast-iron stove in the corner, a rough-hewn table flanked by benches, and two narrow beds pushed against the far wall. A curtain divided off what Eliza assumed was Ethan's sleeping area. The floor was packed earth, swept clean. Shelves held tin plates, mugs, a few jars of preserves. A rifle hung above the door. It smelled of wood smoke and coffee, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging in bunches from the rafters. It smelled like a home that was doing its best. "Sit, miss," May said, pulling out a bench. Eliza sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. She watched as the girls moved with practiced efficiency. Lila stoking the stove, May slicing bread from a dark loaf wrapped in cloth. They worked in tandem, passing items back and forth without speaking, their movements synchronized in that uncanny way of twins. Ethan entered, carrying a bucket of water from the well. He poured it into a basin, washed his hands and face, then filled 3 tin cups and set them on the table. He placed one in front of Eliza without looking at her. "Thank you," she said. He grunted. The meal was simple. Beans cooked with salt pork, cornbread, sliced onions. No one spoke while they ate. Eliza forced herself to take small bites, chewing slowly, though her body screamed for her to devour everything in reach. She'd learned the hard way that eating too fast after going too long led to sickness. Lila finished first and leaned her elbows on the table, studying Eliza with open curiosity. "What's your name, miss?" "Lila," Ethan said, voice low and warning. "It's all right," Eliza said. She met the girl's gaze. Eliza Moore." "Pretty name," Lila grinned. "I'm Lila, and this is May. We're 8.5. Pa's 34, but he acts older 'cause he worries too much." "Lila, well, you do." May ducked her head, hiding a smile. Ethan set down his fork with deliberate care. "Girls, finish your supper." They obeyed, but Lila kept sneaking glances at Eliza, questions clearly bubbling beneath the surface. May ate in silence, her pale eyes soft and thoughtful. When the meal ended, Ethan stood and began clearing the table. Eliza rose to help, but he shook his head. "You're a guest." "I can sit." It wasn't harsh, but it was final. Eliza sat. The girls washed the dishes in the basin, whispering to each other in voices too low to hear. Ethan dried each piece and returned it to the shelf with methodical precision. The routine was worn smooth by repetition, a family moving through familiar rhythms, filling the silence left by whoever used to complete the pattern. A wife, Eliza guessed. Lila had mentioned Pa says, but never Ma says. The absence hung in the room like dust in sunlight, invisible until you knew to look for it. When the work was done, Ethan sent the girls to wash up and change for bed. They obeyed with only token protest, disappearing behind the curtain. He poured himself another cup of water and leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest. "You can take the girls' beds tonight," he said. "They'll bunk with me." "I don't want to eat." "It's already decided." He studied her with those winter sky eyes. "You got business in Red Creek, Mrs. Moore?" The title stung, though it shouldn't have. She'd worn it once, earned it. lost it. Miss, she corrected quietly. And no, no business. Just passing through then. Something like that. Headed where? I don't know yet. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a slight easing, as though her honesty had surprised him. Fair enough, he said. World's full of people who don't know where they're going. He paused. That ash on your skirt. From a fire? Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. Yes. Recent? 6 months ago. He waited, giving her space to elaborate. When she didn't, he nodded slowly. Fire's a hard thing to walk away from, he said, especially if you lost people in it. Her throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but sit frozen while the memories clawed their way up from the place she'd buried them. The smoke, the heat, the small voice crying out in the dark. The moment she'd realized she was too late, too slow, too useless to save the one thing that mattered. Miss Moore. Ethan's voice cut through the spiral. She looked up, vision blurred, and found him watching her with something that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't cruelty either. Understanding, maybe. You don't have to talk about it, he said. Not to me, not to anyone. He set his cup down. But if you're running, you should know, this town doesn't forget easy, and it doesn't forgive much. Whatever you're carrying, it'll follow you here same as anywhere else. I'm not running, Eliza said, voice hoarse. No? No, I'm just trying to figure out how to keep walking. Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps, of a sentiment he knew too well. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed off the counter and gestured toward the girls' beds. Get some rest, Miss Moore. Morning comes early. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. He paused at the curtain, glancing back. Ethan, he said, if you're staying the night, might as well use my name. Then he was gone, the curtain falling shut behind him. Eliza sat alone in the dim room, listening to the low murmur of his voice as he settled the girls for sleep, their soft giggles, the creak of ropes beneath a mattress. The sounds of a family. The sounds of a life she'd lost and didn't know if she deserved to want again. She rose slowly and crossed to the narrow bed against the wall. The blanket smelled of sun and sage. She lay down fully clothed, staring up at the dark rafters, and waited for sleep that wouldn't come. Outside, coyotes sang in the hills, and Eliza Moore, who had walked through fire and survived, closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to stop running. Morning light came thin and gray through the single window. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and the low crack of the stove being fed. She sat up slowly, disoriented, then remembered. The town, the girls, the offer of one-night shelter. Ethan stood at the stove, his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 tin mugs. The girls were still asleep behind the curtain, their breathing soft and even. Morning, he said without turning. Coffee's hot. Eliza rose and smoothed her skirt, still stained, still marked, and crossed to the table. He set a mug in front of her and took the seat opposite, cradling his own cup between calloused hands. They drank in silence. Outside, a rooster crowed. The cow lowed, wanting to be milked, the ordinary sounds of a ranch waking. I'll hitch the wagon after chores, Ethan said. Have you back in town by mid-morning? All right. He looked at her over the rim of his mug. Unless... Eliza's pulse quickened. Unless you're willing to work. She set her cup down carefully. Work? Girls need looking after. House needs tending. I'm running cattle and can't be in 2 places at once. He spoke in the same flat, practical tone he'd used the night before. No emotion, no expectation. Just facts. You stay, you pull your weight. Cooking, mending, keeping the girls out of trouble. I'll provide room and board, no pay, but you'll have a roof and meals. Why? The word came out sharper than she intended. You don't know me, don't know what I've done or where I've been. No, he agreed, but I know my daughters, and they've got good instincts about people. He paused. And I know what it looks like when someone's got nowhere left to go. Eliza's hands trembled around the mug. I'm not a charity case. Didn't say you were. I'm offering work in exchange for shelter. That's a transaction, not charity. The town, the town talks no matter what I do. Let them. She stared at him, this hard-edged man with winter in his eyes and something almost gentle buried beneath the ice. He wasn't rescuing her, wasn't offering salvation or redemption or any of the things she didn't deserve. He was offering her a choice, and that was something she hadn't had in a long time. One condition, she said slowly. His eyebrow lifted. Go on. If I stay, it's because I've earned it, not because you pity me. And the moment I'm not useful, you tell me to leave. No lingering out of obligation. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand across the table. Deal. Eliza took it. His grip was firm, work rough, warm, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt the faintest flicker of something that might, eventually, someday, become hope. The girls tumbled out from behind the curtain moments later, hair tangled and feet bare, and stopped short when they saw Eliza still at the table. You're staying? Lila breathed. Eliza glanced at Ethan, then back at the girls. For now, she said. Lila whooped and grabbed May's hands, spinning her in a circle. May laughed, a sound like water over stones, clear and bright. And Ethan Rowe, who hadn't smiled in longer than he cared to remember, felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward just slightly before he stood and carried his mug to the basin. Come on, then, he said gruffly. Daylight's burning, and there's work to be done. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and inside the small log house at the edge of Red Creek, something fragile and uncertain began to take root. The first week passed in a blur of motion and silence. Eliza woke before dawn each morning to the sound of Ethan moving through the house. Boots on packed earth, the scrape of the stove door, water splashing in the basin. She learned to rise quickly, to braid her hair in the dark, to be dressed and ready by the time pale light touched the eastern hills. He never asked her to wake early, never demanded it, but she understood that in a house built on labor and necessity, idleness was a luxury no one could afford, especially not her. The girls were easier to manage than she'd expected. Lila talked enough for both of them, filling every silence with observations and questions and wild plans that rarely came to fruition. May moved through the world more quietly, watching everything with those pale, thoughtful eyes, speaking only when she had something worth saying. They were self-sufficient in the way children became when adults were too busy surviving to coddle them, dressing themselves, making their beds, carrying water from the well without being asked. But they were still children, still hungry for attention, for gentleness, for someone to notice when they scraped a knee or learned a new word or found a particularly smooth stone by the creek. Eliza noticed. She braided their hair each morning, working out the tangles with patient fingers while Lila chattered and May sat still as stone. She mended the tear in Lila's dress, the one that had been safety-pinned for weeks. She showed May how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl, how to knead bread dough until it stopped sticking to her hands. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things a mother would do. The thought made her chest ache, but she didn't stop. Ethan worked from sunup to sundown, checking fence lines, moving cattle, repairing the barn roof where winter had torn shingles loose. He spoke little and expected less, moving through his days with the grim efficiency of a man who'd learned that emotions were expensive and questions rarely had good answers. At meals, he ate quickly and in silence, then returned to whatever task awaited. He didn't ask about Eliza's past, didn't pry into the ash stains she still couldn't wash out or the nightmares that woke her gasping in the dark. He simply let her be. It was a gift she hadn't known she needed. By the end of the first week, a rhythm had established itself. Eliza rose early, started the stove, made coffee. She woke the girls gently, braided their hair, set out breakfast. While Ethan tended the animals, she swept the floor, washed dishes, planned the day's meals from the modest stores in the root cellar. The girls helped where they could, gathering eggs, weeding the kitchen garden, hanging laundry on the line strung between 2 posts behind the house. In the afternoons, when the heat grew too fierce for outdoor work, Eliza taught them their letters. May already knew most of the alphabet, tracing each character carefully in the dirt with a stick. Lila learned faster but forgot just as quickly, her attention darting from lesson to grasshopper to cloud to whatever caught her restless eye. "Why do we need letters anyway?" Lila asked one afternoon, sprawled on her stomach in the shade of the porch. "Pa doesn't read much."
Your pa can read just fine, Eliza said. He chooses not to waste time on it when there's work to be done. So it's a waste of time? I didn't say that. You just said, I said your father prioritizes labor over leisure. That doesn't make reading worthless. Eliza knelt beside her, drawing the letter B in the dirt. What if someone sends you a letter someday? What if you need to read a contract or a deed or a recipe? I'll ask Pa. What if he's not there? Lila frowned, considering this. Where would he go? I don't know. But people don't stay forever, Lila. It's better to know things for yourself than to depend on someone else to tell you what's true. Something shifted in the girl's expression, a flicker of understanding beyond her years. She picked up her stick and traced the letter carefully, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. May watched from the porch steps, her own letters already complete and precise. Miss Eliza? She said softly. Yes, sweetheart? Will you stay forever? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward into silence. Eliza set down her stick and looked at the girl, small and serious and holding her breath, waiting for an answer Eliza didn't have. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm here now. That counts for something, doesn't it? May considered this, then nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am, it does. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Eliza stood on the porch watching heat lightning flicker on the horizon. The air smelled of dust and coming rain, though the clouds never seemed to arrive. Cicadas sang in the tall grass, their rhythm rising and falling like breath. She didn't hear Ethan approach until he spoke. They're getting attached to you. Eliza turned. He stood in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, arms crossed over his chest. His face was shadowed, unreadable. I know, she said. That going to be a problem? I don't know that either. He was quiet for a moment, watching the distant lightning. Their mother died 2 years ago. Fever. Came on fast and left faster. His voice was flat, stating facts. They don't remember much about her. May remembers more than Lila, but even that's fading. Eliza's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Not asking for sorry. Just telling you so you understand. He shifted his weight. They've been wanting someone to fill that space. Someone who isn't me. I'm not trying to replace. I know. He cut her off, but not unkindly. But they're children, and children want what they want. They're going to build stories in their heads about who you are and why you're here and what it means. He paused. I need to know if you're planning to stay or if this is just temporary. I told you, I don't know. Then figure it out. His tone sharpened. Because if you leave, it'll hurt them, and they've been hurt enough. The words hung between them, heavy with accusation and something rawer, fear maybe, that he was letting a stranger into his daughter's hearts and had no way to protect them from the consequences. Eliza met his gaze, refusing to flinch. I can't promise I'll stay forever, Mr. Rowe. I can't promise anything beyond tomorrow, but I can promise that while I'm here, I'll do right by them. And if I leave, it won't be without warning. I won't just disappear in the night. Why should I believe you? Because I know what it's like to be left. Her voice cracked, just slightly. And I wouldn't do that to them. Not on purpose. Ethan studied her for a long moment, those winter sky eyes searching for lies or weakness or whatever it was he needed to see. Then he nodded once, pushed off the doorframe, and turned to go inside. Ethan? He paused, glancing back. Thank you, she said, for giving me a chance. His expression softened, just a fraction, just enough. Don't thank me yet, Miss Moore. Summer's just getting started. The door closed behind him, and Eliza was alone again, with the heat lightning and the cicadas and the weight of promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The town came to them 3 days later. Eliza had just finished hanging laundry when she saw the wagon approaching, dust rising in a thin plume behind it. She shaded her eyes, squinting against the midday glare, and recognized the rig from the general store. 2 women sat on the bench seat, the one in blue calico who'd turned away from Eliza that first day, and another in gray with a bonnet tied tight beneath her chin. Mrs. Calloway and Mrs. Tate, if Eliza remembered the girl's chatter correctly. Her stomach tightened. Lila, May, she called. Go find your father. But we're playing
Now, please." Something in her tone made them obey without argument. They scrambled off the porch and ran toward the barn, bare feet flashing in the sun. Eliza wiped her damp hands on her apron and walked to the edge of the yard, positioning herself between the house and the approaching wagon. The women pulled up a few yards away, and Mrs. Calloway set the brake with a sharp jerk. "Afternoon," Eliza said, keeping her voice level. Mrs. Calloway descended from the wagon without assistance, her skirts rustling stiffly. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, with dark hair streaked gray and a mouth that looked as though it had forgotten how to smile. "Miss Moore," she said crisply, "or is it Mrs.?" "Miss." The sound conveyed volumes of judgment. "We've come to speak with Mr. Rowe. Is he available?" "He's working. Can I help you with something?" Mrs. Tate leaned forward on the wagon seat, her round face pinched with concern. "We heard he's taken in a woman, a stranger with no references and no family. We wanted to make sure, but that I'm not corrupting his daughters," Eliza finished. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. "We're concerned for the girl's welfare. A man alone with children is vulnerable to unscrupulous individuals. Unscrupulous. Women who might take advantage of his situation for their own gain." Eliza felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but forced herself to breathe through it. "I'm working in exchange for room and board. There's no advantage being taken by anyone." "So you claim," Mrs. Calloway folded her arms. "But appearances matter, Miss Moore, especially in a community like ours. A single woman living under the same roof as a widower, it raises questions. Then perhaps the community should ask those questions directly instead of sending representatives. We're trying to be neighborly." "No," Eliza said quietly. "You're trying to run me off." Silence fell, brittle and sharp. Mrs. Tate flushed and looked away, but Mrs. Calloway held Eliza's gaze without flinching. "If you have nothing to hide, you won't object to answering a few simple questions. Where are you from? What brought you to Red Creek? Why were you alone and destitute when you arrived?" "That's enough." Ethan's voice cut across the yard like a blade. He strode toward them, the girls trailing behind, his expression carved from stone. He stopped beside Eliza, close enough that his shoulder nearly brushed hers, a statement of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone. "Mrs. Calloway," he said flatly. "Mrs. Tate. Appreciate the visit, but I don't recall inviting it." Mrs. Calloway's chin lifted. "We're concerned, Ethan. The girls are fine, well-fed, well-cared for, and none of your business. The town has a right. The town has opinions. That doesn't make them rights." His voice stayed level, but there was steel beneath it. "Miss Moore works for me. What she does and why she's here is between her and me. If that troubles your sensibilities, you're welcome to stay in town and trouble yourself elsewhere." Mrs. Tate twisted her hands in her lap. "We're only trying to help. If you want to help, bring by some preserves or flour when supplies run low. Otherwise, I'd appreciate you letting us get back to work." Mrs. Calloway's mouth thinned to a hard line. She looked from Ethan to Eliza and back again, then climbed into the wagon with stiff dignity. "Very well," she said coldly, "but don't say we didn't warn you when this arrangement ends poorly." "I'll keep that in mind." She snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching over dry earth. Mrs. Tate glanced back once, her expression apologetic, then faced forward as they pulled away. Eliza watched them go, her hands clenched in her apron, heartbeat hammering in her ears. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yeah, I did." Ethan's jaw was tight. "They had no right. They're protecting the town. I understand that. They're protecting their own sense of righteousness." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression had shifted. Anger, yes, but also a kind of weary understanding. "You're an outsider, an unknown. That makes you dangerous in their eyes, no matter what you do or don't do. So what do I do? You keep working, keep proving them wrong." He paused. "Or you leave. That's an option too." Eliza looked at the house, small and weathered and imperfect, but solid. Then at the girls, watching wide-eyed from the porch. Then at Ethan, this hard man who'd defended her to his neighbors without hesitation. "I'm not leaving," she said. His expression didn't change, but something eased in his posture. All right then. He walked back to the barn, and the girls ran to Eliza, wrapping their arms around her waist. Are you staying? May whispered. Eliza smoothed the girl's hair, feeling the fine strands slip between her fingers like silk. Yes, sweetheart, I'm staying. For now, at least. For as long as she was wanted. The heat pressed down harder as June deepened into July. The grass turned brittle and gold, crackling underfoot. The well water grew warm, and even the shade felt stifling. Ethan worked longer hours, rising before dawn and returning after dusk, his shirt soaked with sweat and his face drawn with exhaustion. Eliza learned to manage the house without him. She rationed water, cooked meals that didn't require the stove to burn all day, kept the girls quiet during the hottest hours when tempers frayed easily. She learned which hens were reliable layers and which were getting old. She learned that the cow, a placid creature named Buttercup, kicked if you didn't talk to her while milking. She learned that May was terrified of thunderstorms, and Lila was terrified of nothing at all. She learned the shape of the family she'd stumbled into, and slowly, cautiously, began to fit herself into the spaces they'd left open. One evening, she found Ethan on the porch after supper, staring out at the darkening hills. His hands hung loose between his knees, shoulders slumped with a weariness that went deeper than physical labor. Girls asleep? He asked without looking at her. Just now. Lila fought it, but May was out before I finished the story. You're good with them. They make it easy. He was quiet for a moment, then gestured to the space beside him on the steps. Sit if you want. Eliza hesitated, then lowered herself onto the weathered wood, leaving a careful distance between them. The evening air smelled of dust and sage, and somewhere in the hills a coyote called. This heat keeps up. I'm going to lose cattle, Ethan said. Creek's running low, and the north pasture's got nothing left worth grazing. Can you move them? Already did, twice. Running out of options. He rubbed a hand over his face. Might have to sell some off early. Take a loss before they get too thin to be worth anything. Eliza didn't know anything about cattle or markets or ranch economics, but she understood loss. Understood the feeling of watching something you'd worked for slip away despite your best efforts. I'm sorry, she said. Not your fault. I know, but I'm still sorry. He glanced at her, something almost like gratitude in his eyes. Appreciate that. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to prick through the deepening blue. The cicadas sang their endless summer song, and the heat radiated up from the earth like a living thing. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Eliza's shoulders tensed. You can ask. That fire you walked away from. The one that left ash on your skirt. He paused. You lose someone in it? Her breath caught. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but feel the weight of the question crushing down on her chest. Yes, she whispered finally. Family? My daughter. She was 4. The words tasted like ash and smoke and grief too big to name. Ethan didn't say he was sorry, didn't offer platitudes or empty comfort. He just sat with her in the dark, letting the truth hang between them. And after a long moment, he said quietly, That why you're so good with the girls? Because you remember how. Eliza's throat closed. She nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd be proud of you, he said, wherever she is. Proud that you kept going. I don't know if I did the right thing, keeping going. You're here, aren't you? That's more than some people manage. She looked at him. This man who'd lost his wife and raised his daughters alone and kept a failing ranch running through sheer stubborn will, and saw the truth of it in his eyes. He understood. Not the specifics maybe, but the shape of grief, the way it hollowed you out and left you walking through the world like a ghost, going through motions because stopping meant giving in. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For not asking more than I can tell you. He nodded once, then stood and stretched, joints popping. I'm heading to bed. Morning comes early. Ethan? He paused at the door. Your wife, Eliza said. What was her name? Caroline. He said it carefully, like he didn't use it often anymore. Her name was Caroline. She'd be proud of you too, the way you've raised them. Something flickered across his face, pain maybe, or longing, or both. Then it was gone, shuttered behind the careful blankness he wore like armor. "Good night, Miss Moore." "Good night." The door closed, and Eliza sat alone on the porch, staring out at the dark hills, and let herself cry quietly for the daughter she'd lost, and the life she'd never get back, and the strange, fragile thing growing in this house that she didn't know how to name. In the morning, she woke to rain. Not the gentle spring rain that coaxed green things from the earth, but a hard-driving downpour that hammered the roof and turned the yard to mud within minutes. Thunder rolled across the hills, shaking the windows in their frames, and lightning split the sky in jagged white fractures. The girls woke terrified. May crawled into Eliza's bed and buried her face against her shoulder, trembling. Lila tried to be brave, but flinched with every crack of thunder. "It's all right," Eliza murmured, wrapping her arms around them both. "It's just a storm. It'll pass." "What if it doesn't?" May whispered. "It will. Storms always do." Ethan appeared in the doorway, hair wet, shirt plastered to his chest. "Creek's rising fast. I need to check the cattle, make sure they haven't spooked. You three stay inside." "Be careful," Eliza said. He nodded and was gone, the door slamming behind him. The storm raged for an hour. 2. The wind screamed around the corners of the house, and water streamed through a crack in the roof, dripping into a bucket Eliza positioned beneath it. The girls clung to her, and she sang to them, old songs her own mother had sung, half-remembered lullabies about stars and ships and roads that led home. By mid-morning, the rain slowed to a steady drizzle. The thunder moved east, grumbling like a retreating army. Eliza made weak tea and toasted bread over the stove, and they ate in silence, listening to the water drip into the bucket. Ethan didn't return. By noon, Eliza's stomach was knotted with worry. She told the girls to stay inside, put on her shawl, soaked through within seconds, and stepped out into the rain. The world had transformed. The creek, normally a lazy trickle, roared brown and swollen, pushing at its banks. Mud sucked at her boots with every step. She called Ethan's name, but the wind carried her voice away. Then she heard it. A cry, high and terrified, coming from the direction of the creek. She ran. The creek had become a monster. Eliza stumbled through the mud, rain stinging her eyes, her boots slipping on grass turned slick as ice. The roar of rushing water drowned out everything else. Her gasping breath, the thunder still rumbling in the distance, the frantic beating of her own heart. She pushed through a stand of willows, branches whipping at her face, and stopped short at the edge of the swollen bank. 20 feet out, clinging to a boulder that split the current, was Lila. The girl's face was white with terror. Her mouth open in screams Eliza could barely hear over the water's rage. Her dress was plastered to her small frame, and her hands gripped the rock with desperate strength. But the creek pulled at her legs, trying to tear her loose and carry her downstream to where the water turned savage over hidden rocks. "Lila!" Eliza screamed. The girl's head snapped toward her. "Miss Eliza, I can't hold on." Eliza's mind went blank with fear, then snapped into cold clarity. She scanned the bank. No rope, no branch long enough to reach. Nothing but churning brown water and the distance between them that might as well have been a mile. She'd have to go in. The thought brought a wave of pure terror. She couldn't swim well, had never learned properly, had always feared deep water with an instinct that went bone deep. But Lila was slipping, fingers white and shaking, and there was no time to run for help or find another way. Eliza kicked off her boots and waded in. The current hit her like a fist. Cold despite the summer heat, strong enough to knock her sideways, it grabbed at her skirts and pulled. She fought forward step by agonizing step, arms outstretched for balance, eyes locked on Lila's terrified face. "Hold on, sweetheart. I'm coming." "Hurry." The water rose to Eliza's waist, then her chest. The bottom disappeared beneath her feet, and suddenly she was swimming, barely, desperately, swallowing mouthfuls of muddy water as the current tried to sweep her past the boulder. Her hands found stone, rough and solid, and she hauled herself forward until she could grab Lila's arm. "I've got you." "Don't let go." "Never. I've got you." Eliza pulled the girl against her chest, wrapping one arm around her small body while the other clung to the rock. Lila's arms circled her neck in a stranglehold, sobbing against her shoulder. Getting to the boulder had been hard. Getting back was going to be impossible. Eliza looked at the bank. It seemed twice as far now, the current between them and safety moving faster, meaner, full of debris from upstream. A broken fence post tumbled past, spinning in the brown water. If they let go, if they tried to swim for it and the current caught them wrong, they'd be battered against rocks or dragged under or swept so far downstream they'd never find their way back. "Miss Eliza, I'm scared." "I know, baby. Me too." Eliza's arms were already shaking with cold and effort. She couldn't hold on much longer. "Lila, listen to me. When I say go, you kick as hard as you can. Use your legs. Help me get us to shore. Can you do that?" The girl nodded against her neck, teeth chattering. "On 3. 1. Eliza!" Ethan's voice cut through the roar of water. He stood on the bank, soaked and wild-eyed, a rope coiled in his hands. Behind him, May clutched a fence post, her small face streaked with tears. "Catch!" He swung the rope in a wide arc and threw. It fell short by 3 feet. He hauled it back, repositioned, threw again. This time, Eliza caught it with her free hand, fingers closing around the rough hemp like a lifeline from heaven itself. "Wrap it around you," Ethan shouted. "Under your arms." She did, awkward and clumsy with one hand while Lila clung to her, but she managed a loop that wouldn't slip. Ethan tied his end around a tree trunk, tested it, then waded into the water up to his thighs. "I'm gonna pull," he called. "Don't fight the current. Let it help carry you toward me." Eliza nodded, tightened her grip on Lila, and pushed off from the boulder. The creek seized them immediately. Eliza felt herself spinning, tumbling, water closing over her head as Lila's weight dragged them both under. She kicked hard, broke the surface gasping, and felt the rope go taut as Ethan hauled them toward shore. Her shoulders screamed in protest. Her lungs burned. Lila's grip tightened until Eliza could barely breathe, but she held on, kicking when she could, letting the rope and Ethan's strength do the rest. Her knees hit mud, then her hands. She crawled forward on shaking limbs, Lila still wrapped around her until they were clear of the water and collapsing together on the bank. Ethan was there in an instant, lifting Lila away, checking her over with shaking hands. "Are you hurt? Did you hit anything?" "I'm okay, Pa. I'm okay." Lila was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to see. The water was so high. I didn't mean to fall." "Shh. I know. I know." He crushed her against his chest, eyes squeezed shut, and for a moment he looked like a man who'd seen his whole world nearly disappear. May ran to them and wrapped her arms around both her father and sister, adding her own quiet tears to the mix. Eliza pushed herself to sitting, shivering violently, and tried to stand. Her legs buckled. She sat back down hard, mud squelching beneath her, and started to laugh, a sound edged with hysteria and relief and the aftermath of pure terror. Ethan looked over at her, still holding his daughters. "You all right, Miss Moore?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "Ask me when I can feel my hands again." He set the girls down gently. "May, take your sister to the house. Get her dry clothes. Get her warm. I'll be right behind you." "Yes, Pa." May took Lila's hand and led her away, both of them stumbling through the mud like little ghosts. Ethan crossed to Eliza and dropped to one knee beside her. Up close she could see he was shaking too, his jaw tight with the effort of holding himself together. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," he said roughly. "I couldn't let her drown." "You could have drowned yourself. You can barely swim." "How did you know that?" "Because I watched you nearly go under twice." His hands hovered over her shoulders, not quite touching. "You should have waited for me." "There wasn't time." "There's always time." No, Eliza said sharply. "There isn't. I learned that the hard way." Her voice cracked. "I waited once. Waited for someone else to fix things, to save what needed saving. And by the time I stopped waiting, it was too late. I won't make that mistake again." Understanding dawned in his eyes. The fire, the daughter, the guilt she carried like stones in her pockets. "Come on," he said quietly. He stood and offered his hand. "Let's get you inside before you freeze." She let him pull her to her feet. Her legs held this time, barely, and they walked back to the house together through rain that had gentled to a whisper. Inside, the girls were wrapped in blankets by the stove, their wet clothes hanging from chairs to dry. May had gotten the fire built up, and warmth was beginning to chase the chill from the air. Ethan wrapped a blanket around Eliza's shoulders and guided her to a seat near the heat. "Stay there," he ordered. "Don't move." She didn't argue. He disappeared behind the curtain and returned with dry clothes, one of his own shirts, too big but clean, and a pair of trousers that would need rolling at the ankles. He handed them to her without meeting her eyes. "Change. I'll turn my back." "Thank you." She stripped off her sodden dress and undergarments with shaking hands, her fingers so cold and clumsy she could barely work the buttons. The dry clothes felt like heaven against her skin. When she was decent, she cleared her throat, and Ethan turned back around. He studied her for a long moment, standing in his kitchen wearing his clothes, hair dripping onto his floor, alive when she could so easily have been dead, and something shifted in his expression. The careful distance he'd maintained since the day she'd arrived cracked just enough to let something warmer through. "You saved my daughter," he said. "Anyone would have—" "No, they wouldn't." His voice was firm. "Most people would have run for help, would have hesitated. You didn't think. You just moved." He paused. "That kind of courage, that kind of love, it's rare." "I didn't do it for courage. I did it because I couldn't lose another child." The words came out broken, raw. "I couldn't stand there and watch her slip away and do nothing. Not again." Lila looked up from her blanket, eyes wide. "Another child?" Eliza's breath caught. She hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant to expose that wound in front of them. But they were watching her with such open, trusting faces, and she was so tired of carrying the weight alone. "I had a daughter once," she said slowly. "Her name was Clara. She was 4 years old when she died in a fire." She looked at Lila, then May. "I couldn't save her. I tried, but I was too late, and she—" Her voice broke. "I lost her." May's eyes filled with tears. Lila slipped off her chair and crossed to Eliza, climbing into her lap and wrapping thin arms around her neck. "I'm sorry you lost Clara," the girl whispered, "but I'm glad you saved me." Eliza held her tight, face pressed into tangled wet hair, and wept. She wept for Clara, for the life she'd lost, for the months of wandering and grief and emptiness. She wept for the fear that had gripped her at the creek, for the strength it had taken to go into the water anyway, for the desperate relief of pulling Lila to safety. She wept because she was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling things she'd thought had burned away with everything else. And when she finally raised her head, gasping and raw, Ethan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name, understanding and grief and something that looked almost like respect. "You're not alone anymore, Miss Moore," he said quietly. "Not if you don't want to be." The words settled into her chest like embers finding kindling, small and warm and dangerous in their possibility. May climbed into her lap beside Lila, and the three of them sat together by the fire while the rain drummed on the roof and Ethan moved quietly through the room, making coffee and checking the stove and giving them the space to simply be. By evening, the storm had passed. The sky cleared to pale blue streaked with gold, and the world emerged scrubbed clean and dripping. The creek still ran high, but had lost its fury, settling back toward its banks with sullen reluctance. Ethan went out to check the damage. Fences down, a section of roof torn loose on the barn, 2 calves missing that he'd have to search for come morning. But the girls were safe. The house was intact, and Eliza Moore, who'd walked into Red Creek 6 weeks ago with nothing but ash and grief, sat on the porch watching the sunset and felt something uncurl in her chest that had been clenched tight for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe easy. The town, predictably, heard about the creek incident within 2 days. Eliza was kneading bread when the wagon rolled into the yard. Not Mrs. Calloway this time, but 3 women she didn't recognize, all wearing Sunday dresses and expressions of determined concern. Behind them rode 2 men on horseback, one old enough to be a grandfather, the other younger with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Her hands stilled in the dough. Ethan emerged from the barn wiping his hands on a rag, his face going carefully blank when he saw the visitors. "Sheriff Crawford, gentlemen, ladies, what brings you out?" The sheriff dismounted, a lean man in his 30s with a weathered face and tired eyes. Heard there was some trouble with the creek. Wanted to make sure everyone's all right.
We're fine. I appreciate the concern.
Also heard your hired woman went into the water after one of your girls.
The sheriff's gaze shifted to Eliza, visible through the open door.
That true?
It is.
Brave thing to do.
Foolish thing, some would say, the older man added. He sat his horse with the stiff-backed posture of someone used to being listened to. Could have gotten herself killed. Could have gotten the child killed, too. But she didn't, Ethan said flatly. Both of them made it out fine. This time, one of the women stepped forward, hands clasped at her waist. Mr. Rowe, we're not here to criticize. We're here because we're concerned about the welfare of your daughters. A single woman living in your house without proper marriage or family ties, it creates a situation that's, well, irregular. Irregular, Ethan repeated. Unseemly, another woman offered. People talk.
Let them.
The sheriff cleared his throat. Ethan, they've got a point. I know you're doing your best, but appearances matter. If you want to keep Miss Moore on as help, that's your business. But maybe it'd be better if she stayed in town. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house. No. Eliza's voice carried across the yard, clear and firm. She stepped out onto the porch, dusting flour from her hands. Thank you for the offer, Sheriff, but I'm staying here. The older man's eyebrows rose. Young woman, you don't seem to understand. I understand perfectly. You're worried about propriety, about what it looks like for me to live under the same roof as Mr. Rowe. She descended the steps, meeting their gazes without flinching. But I work for him. I care for his daughters. I keep his house. That's not irregular. That's employment. Employment that crosses boundaries. What boundaries? Her voice sharpened. I sleep in the girls' room. Mr. Rowe sleeps in his own space.
We share meals and work, nothing more. If your minds insist on finding impropriety where none exists, that's your failing, not ours. One of the women gasped. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Furthermore, Eliza continued, momentum building, I didn't risk my life in that creek to prove anything to this town. I did it because a child was in danger, and I was the only one there to help. If you want to condemn me for that, if you want to twist an act of desperation into something sordid, then go ahead. But don't expect me to apologize for saving Lila's life just because it doesn't fit your narrow definition of proper behavior. Silence fell, heavy and stunned. The older man's face had gone red. That kind of defiance is exactly what I'd expect from someone with backbone, Ethan cut in. He moved to stand beside Eliza, not touching her, but close enough that the statement was clear. Miss Moore has done more for this family in 6 weeks than anyone in town has done in 2 years. She's earned her place here. If that bothers you, Sheriff, then I suggest you find someone else to bother. Sheriff Crawford sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Ethan, I'm not trying to make trouble, but there are rules. Rules for what? For who a man can hire to help raise his daughters? For how long a woman can grieve before she's expected to explain herself? Ethan's voice stayed level, but steel ran beneath it. Miss Moore isn't breaking any laws, neither am I. So unless you've got legal grounds to tell me how to run my household, I'd appreciate you riding back to town and letting us get back to work. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. Just wanted to check in, make sure things were square. He swung back into the saddle. Ladies, gentlemen, I think we've said our piece. The women looked unhappy but climbed into the wagon. The older man lingered, mouth tight with disapproval. You're making a mistake, Rowe, he said. Wouldn't be the first time. Mark my words, this won't end well. Then I guess we'll deal with that when it comes. The man shook his head and rode off, the others following. The wagon rattled back down the road, leaving dust and judgment in its wake. When they were gone, Ethan let out a long breath and turned to Eliza. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She was shaking slightly, adrenaline still coursing through her. I'm tired of people deciding who I am without asking, tired of being treated like a problem that needs solving. You handled them well. I handled them like someone with nothing left to lose. She looked at him. Was I wrong? About the boundaries, I mean. Have we crossed lines I didn't realize? No. He said it firmly. Everything you said was true. We've kept this proper. Anyone with sense can see that. But they don't have sense. No, they've got fear and boredom and too much time to worry about other people's business. He paused. That speech you gave, about not apologizing for saving Lila. You meant that? Every word. Something in his expression softened. Good. Because you shouldn't. What you did took more courage than most folks find in a lifetime. He hesitated, then added quietly, Caroline would have liked you. She had that same fire when people pushed too hard. It was the first time he'd spoken of his wife in present terms. Not as memory, but as person, someone with preferences and personality beyond the fact of her absence. I wish I could have known her, Eliza said. Yeah, me too. He looked toward the barn, shoulders squaring. I've got work to finish before dark. Ethan? He glanced back. Thank you for standing with me. You stood for my daughter, he said simply. Least I can do is stand for you. He walked away, and Eliza returned to the house where the bread dough waited, and the girls were playing jacks on the floor, and the ordinary rhythms of the day continued as though nothing had changed. But something had changed. She'd drawn a line in the dirt and dared the town to cross it, and Ethan had stood beside her when she did. That night, after the girls were asleep, Eliza found herself on the porch again. It had become her ritual, this quiet hour between the day's work and sleep, when the world softened and her thoughts could wander without purpose or direction. Ethan joined her without asking, lowering himself onto the steps with a soft grunt. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies drift through the dark. How's your shoulder? He asked. Eliza rolled it experimentally. It ached from the rope burn and the strain of fighting the current, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from using your body for something that mattered. Sore. I'll live. You should rest it tomorrow. There's too much to do. Then I'll do it. You rest. She smiled faintly. You're not very good at taking care of yourself, are you? Pot calling the kettle black, Miss Moore. Fair point. They lapsed into silence again. An owl called from the cottonwoods by the creek. Eliza? It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his voice did something strange to her heartbeat. Yes? What you said today, about having nothing left to lose, did you mean that? She considered the question carefully. A month ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. But now, sitting here with the warmth of the house at her back and the memory of Lila's arms around her neck, and the knowledge that somewhere in this hard country she'd found something that felt dangerously close to belonging. No, she said quietly. I think I have quite a lot to lose now. That's what scares me. He looked at her, really looked, and in his eyes she saw understanding. He knew what it was to be afraid of losing things, to hold tight to what remained because you'd already lost so much. Then we'll have to make sure you don't lose it, he said. It wasn't a promise. Wasn't even close to one, but it felt like the beginning of something that might, eventually, turn into hope. The days following the confrontation settled into something almost peaceful, though Eliza knew better than to trust the quiet. Summer's heat pressed down harder, turning the air thick and still, but inside the house a different kind of warmth had taken root, something fragile and new that none of them spoke about directly, but all of them felt. The girls grew bolder in their affection. May no longer hesitated before taking Eliza's hand, and Lila had taken to calling her Miss Eliza, with a possessive pride that suggested she'd claimed Eliza as her own discovery. They asked questions constantly now about Clara, about the fire, about the life Eliza had lived before Red Creek. She answered what she could, finding that the telling hurt less each time, the memories losing some of their razor edges as she shared them with these two small souls who listened without judgment. Ethan watched these exchanges from the corners of rooms, his expression unreadable, but his presence constant. He'd begun trusting Eliza with more, letting her handle the money for supplies when he went to town, asking her opinion on which cattle to sell, including her in decisions that went beyond housekeeping and into the territory of partnership. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, like the slow turn of seasons. One evening in late July, Eliza was mending one of Ethan's shirts when she noticed the girls whispering by the window. They kept glancing at her, then at each other, faces bright with poorly concealed excitement. All right, she said, setting down her needle. What are you two plotting? Lila's eyes went wide with feigned innocence. Nothing. Lila Rowe, you are many things, but a good liar is not one of them. May ducked her head, shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles. Fine, Lila said, giving in immediately. We want to show you something, but you have to promise not to tell Pa yet. That depends entirely on what it is. It's not bad. We've just been working on it, and it's not finished, and... She bounced on her toes. Please, just come look? Eliza glanced toward the barn where Ethan was finishing evening chores, then back at the girls' pleading faces. All right, show me. They led her behind the house to a spot where the tall grass had been trampled flat in a rough circle. In the center sat a collection of objects that made Eliza's breath catch. Smooth river stones arranged in careful patterns, wildflowers wilting in the heat but placed with obvious care. A small wooden cross fashioned from twigs and twine. It's for Clara, May said softly. So she has a place, even though she's not here. Eliza's vision blurred. She knelt in the grass, reaching out to touch the cross with trembling fingers. The girls had carved a single letter into the wood with painstaking effort, a C, crooked but unmistakable. We thought maybe it would help, Lila added, suddenly uncertain. If she had somewhere you could visit, even if it's just pretend. It's not pretend, Eliza whispered. She pulled both girls into her arms, holding them tight against the sob building in her chest. It's perfect. It's the most perfect thing anyone's ever done for me. They stayed there until the light faded, sitting in the grass while Eliza told them stories about Clara, how she'd loved butterflies, how she'd sing to herself while playing, how she'd had Lila's fearlessness and May's gentle heart. The girls listened with solemn attention, asking questions that showed they understood the weight of what they'd created wasn't just a memorial, but an invitation for Eliza to stop carrying her grief alone. When they finally returned to the house, Ethan was waiting on the porch. He took in their grass-stained clothes and tear-marked faces, and his expression shifted to concern. Everything all right? Yes, Eliza said, her voice still rough. Everything's more than all right. He looked between them, clearly confused, but didn't press. The girls ran inside, chattering about supper, leaving Eliza and Ethan alone in the gathering dusk. They made something for me, she said quietly. For Clara. A place to remember her. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something tender. They've got big hearts. They get that from you. No. He shook his head. Caroline was the one with the soft touch. I'm just trying not to mess up what she started. You're doing more than that. Eliza met his gaze. You're raising them to be kind, to see people who are hurting and want to help. That's not common, Ethan. That's rare. He looked away, uncomfortable with the praise, but she saw the way his jaw worked, emotion held back by will and habit. They care about you, he said finally. More every day. I care about them too. I know. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. That's what worries me. Why? Because caring makes it hurt worse when things end. Eliza's chest tightened. Are you asking me to leave? No. The word came quick and firm. But I need to know if you're planning to, if this is temporary or... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. I need to know what this is, Eliza, for their sake. It was the question she'd been avoiding, the one that sat heavy in her mind during the quiet hours before sleep. What was this? What was she doing here? She told herself it was just survival, just a place to rest until she figured out what came next. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than that, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. I don't know what comes next, she admitted. I can't see that far ahead, but I know I'm not ready to leave, not yet. And when you are ready, then I'll tell you. I won't just disappear. She stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. I promised you that once. I meant it. He studied her face like he was trying to read truth written there, then nodded slowly. All right, that's enough for now. But the way he said it suggested it wouldn't be enough forever, that eventually they'd have to name what was growing between them or let it wither from neglect. Not yet, though. For now, they had time. The first test came on a Saturday in early August when Ethan announced he needed to ride to Cheyenne for supplies and wouldn't be back until Monday. It was the first time he'd left them alone for more than a few hours, and Eliza felt the weight of his trust settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. "You sure you'll be all right?" he asked for the third time, loading his saddlebags. "We'll be fine. It's 2 days, not 2 months. Creek's still running high from the rain. We won't go near it. And if someone comes by, I'll handle it." She crossed her arms. "Ethan, we'll be fine. The girls and I have managed before." "Not alone, you haven't. Then it's time we learned." He wanted to argue. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, but finally he just nodded. "All right, but if anything happens, I'll ride to town and get help." "I know." She softened her tone. "Go. Do what you need to do. We'll be here when you get back." He swung into the saddle, then looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I know you will," he said quietly. Then he was gone, the horse's hooves raising dust on the road south. The house felt different without him, larger somehow, and quieter despite the girls' constant chatter. Eliza threw herself into work, keeping them busy with chores and lessons and games that burned off energy before restlessness could set in. They baked bread, weeded the garden, washed every piece of laundry in the house, and hung it to dry in the blistering sun. By evening, they were exhausted in the good way, the kind that came from honest labor. Eliza made supper, beans and cornbread, nothing fancy, and they ate on the porch while the sky turned orange and pink. "Miss Eliza," May said, scraping the last of her beans onto her spoon, "are you going to marry Pa?" Eliza nearly choked on her water. "What?" "May!" Lila hissed. "Well, everyone in town says she will," May continued, undeterred. Mrs. Henderson told Mrs. Calloway that it's only a matter of time before Pa makes an honest woman of her. "An honest woman," Eliza repeated faintly. "Did she now? Is that a bad thing?" May's face scrunched with confusion. "Don't people usually want to get married?" "Some do, some don't." Eliza set down her plate carefully. "Your father and I work together, that's all." "But you like him, don't you?" "Of course I like him." "And he likes you, Lila added. "We can tell." "How can you tell?" "He smiles more when you're around, and he listens when you talk, not just the waiting for his turn to talk kind of listening, the real kind." Lila tilted her head. "And he gave you his shirt to wear after the creek. Pa doesn't share his things." Eliza felt heat creep up her neck. "That was practical. I was wet and cold. He also looks at you like—" May paused, searching for words. "Like Mama used to look at the garden in spring, like something worth tending." The observation was so unexpectedly poetic that Eliza's throat tightened. These children saw too much, understood too much, and she had no idea how to explain the complicated truth that yes, something was growing between her and their father, but it was too new and fragile to name, let alone promise. "Your pa and I are friends," she said carefully. "Good friends who work well together. Anything beyond that—" She stopped. "It's not something to rush into or assume." "But you're not saying no," Lila pointed out. "I'm saying it's complicated. That's what adults say when they mean yes but don't want to admit it yet." Eliza couldn't help but laugh. "You're too smart for your own good, you know that?" "Pa says the same thing," Lila grinned. "Usually right before he gives in and lets me do what I want." "Well, I'm not your pa, and I'm not giving in to anything." Eliza stood, gathering their plates. "Now go wash up for bed, and no more talk about marriage. That's between your father and me, if it ever becomes anything at all." The girls exchanged knowing looks but obeyed, disappearing inside while Eliza stood alone on the porch and tried to calm the racing of her heart. Was she considering it? The possibility of staying not just as hired help, but as something more permanent? The thought terrified her. She'd been married once, had built a life with a man she'd loved, and watched it all burn to ash. The idea of trying again, of opening herself to that kind of vulnerability. But this wasn't the same. Ethan wasn't asking for declarations or promises. He was just asking her to stay, to be here, present, part of this small, battered family that had somehow stitched itself around her without her quite noticing. And maybe that was enough.
Maybe she didn't need to name it or define it or make it more than what it was. Maybe she could just let herself be here.
The second day passed even more quietly than the first. Eliza and the girls picked berries from the brambles behind the house, staining their fingers purple and eating as many as they saved. They cleaned the barn, fed the chickens, spent the hottest part of the afternoon reading in the shade. It was peaceful in a way that made Eliza nervous, like the calm before a storm. The storm arrived as the sun was setting. She heard the horses first, multiple riders approaching fast. Eliza herded the girls inside and told them to stay there, then stepped onto the porch with her heart hammering. 3 men rode into the yard, none of them familiar. They were rough-looking, unshaven, and dust-covered, with the lean, hard edges of men who lived by their own rules. The one in front sat his horse with lazy confidence, eyes scanning the property with an assessment that made Eliza's skin crawl. "Evening, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "This the Rowe place?" "It is." Eliza kept her voice steady. "Mr. Rowe isn't here at present. Can I help you with something?" "Maybe." He swung down from his saddle, ignoring the way she stiffened. "Name's Jack Darren. These are my associates. We're looking for some cattle that wandered off from a spread north of here. Thought they might have gotten mixed in with Rowe's herd." "Mr. Rowe's cattle are all accounted for." "You sure about that? You keep the books, do you?" "I know what's on this property." Darren smiled, showing teeth. "No offense, ma'am, but I think I'd rather wait and talk to the man himself." "When's he due back?" "I couldn't say." "That's so." He took a step closer. "Well then, maybe we'll just have a look around while we wait. Make sure those cattle really aren't here." "You will not." Eliza descended the porch steps, positioning herself between the men and the house. "This is private property. You have no right to search it without Mr. Rowe's permission." "Private property," Darren repeated, amused. "You hear that, boys? The lady's giving us a lesson in property rights." The other 2 men chuckled, shifting in their saddles. Eliza's pulse pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet Darren's eyes without flinching. She'd faced down the town's judgment, had walked into a flooding creek, had survived loss that would have broken weaker people. She would not be intimidated by thugs looking for an easy mark. "I suggest you leave," she said coldly. "Now." "Or what?" Darren's smile widened. "You going to make us?" Behind her, the door creaked open. Eliza's heart sank. She'd told the girls to stay inside. But it wasn't the girls who stepped onto the porch. It was Ethan. He must have ridden through the night, must have pushed his horse hard to get back a day early. He looked exhausted and trail-worn, but his eyes were sharp as flint, and his hand rested easy on the rifle he carried. "Think the lady told you to leave?" he said quietly. Darren's expression shifted, calculation replacing amusement. "Rowe, didn't expect you back so soon." Clearly, Ethan descended the steps in 2 strides, positioning himself beside Eliza. "These men bothering you, Miss Moore?" "They're looking for cattle. I told them we don't have any that aren't ours." "She tell you the truth?" Ethan's gaze never left Darren. "So unless you've got proof otherwise, I suggest you mount up and ride out." "Now, Ethan, no need to be unfriendly." "I'm being plenty friendly. Unfriendly would involve this rifle." He didn't raise the weapon, didn't need to. The threat was clear in his voice, in his stance, in the cold promise in his eyes. "You've got 10 seconds to clear my property. After that, I stop counting and start shooting." Darren held his gaze for a long, tense moment, then laughed, a sound with no humor in it. All right. We're going. No need for trouble." He swung back into his saddle. "But you might want to teach your woman better manners, Rowe. Ain't proper for her to be giving orders when the man of the house is away." "The woman of this house," Ethan said softly, "is free to give any orders she sees fit, and you'd be wise to listen when she does." The words landed like a stone in still water. The woman of this house. Not hired help, not temporary. The woman of this house. Darren's eyes narrowed, but he jerked his horse's head around and rode off, his companions following. They disappeared into the dusk, and Eliza realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, legs shaking with delayed fear and adrenaline. Ethan lowered the rifle and turned to her. "You all right?" "Fine. They didn't touch me." "They scared you." "They tried." She lifted her chin. "It didn't work."
His mouth quirked, almost a smile. No, I don't imagine it did. He looked toward the house where two small faces were pressed against the window. Girls safe?
Perfectly. I made them stay inside. Good. He handed her the rifle. Take this. I need to put my horse up. Eliza took the weapon, its weight unfamiliar in her hands. Ethan? What you said to him? About me being… She faltered. Did you mean that? He paused, one hand on his horse's bridle, and looked back at her. The last light caught in his eyes, turning them the color of summer sky at twilight. Yeah, he said quietly. I did. Then he was gone, leading his horse to the barn, and Eliza stood alone in the yard holding a rifle and a truth she didn't quite know what to do with. The woman of this house. That night, after the girls were asleep and the doors were barred, Eliza found Ethan checking the windows for the third time. He moved through the house like a man expecting trouble, and she recognized the restlessness in him, the need to protect, to patrol, to make sure the walls held against whatever darkness waited outside. They're not coming back tonight, she said. You don't know that. I do. They were testing us, seeing if we'd scare easy. We didn't. She crossed to him, stilling his movement with a hand on his arm. Ethan, stop. He looked down at where her fingers rested against his sleeve, then up at her face. I shouldn't have left you alone. You had business in Cheyenne. Business can wait. You and the girls… His jaw clenched. When I came over that rise and saw strange horses in my yard, saw you standing there facing down 3 men. He stopped, breath harsh. I've never been that afraid in my life. I can take care of myself. I know you can. That's not the point. He covered her hand with his, warm and rough and solid. The point is, you shouldn't have to, not alone. I wasn't alone. I had the girls, and I had your rifle, and I had… She stopped, swallowing hard. I had the knowledge that you'd come back, that you wouldn't leave us unprotected. Never. The word was fierce. I would never do that. They stood close in the dim room, hands still touching, and Eliza felt the truth settle into her bones. She trusted this man, trusted him with her safety, with the girl's safety, with the small, fragile thing growing between them that neither of them had dared to name. What you said to Darren, she whispered. About me being the woman of this house, did you mean it the way it sounded? Depends on how you heard it. I heard it like a claim. Then yeah. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. I meant it like that. Ethan, I'm not asking you for anything, Eliza. Not promises, not vows, not anything you're not ready to give. His eyes held hers, steady and sure. But I need you to know you're not just hired help to me. Haven't been for a while now. You're part of this, part of us. Her breath caught. That terrifies me. I know. I don't know if I can be what you need, what they need. You already are. He lifted his free hand to her face, calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. You saved my daughter's life. You stand up to men twice your size without blinking. You make my girls laugh and my house feel like a home again. That's more than enough. And if I'm not ready for more than this, for marriage or permanence, then we take it slow. We take it however you need to take it. His voice dropped lower. But I need you to stay, Eliza. I need you to stop waiting for reasons to leave and start looking for reasons to stay. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his palm against her skin, the solid presence of him anchoring her when everything else felt uncertain. She'd been running for so long, first from grief, and then from the past, and then from the future she couldn't imagine. But standing here in this small house, with this quiet man and his brave daughters, she felt something shift inside her, a turning, like compass needle finding true north. I'm staying, she whispered. I don't know what that looks like or what it means, but I'm staying. That's enough. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. For now, that's more than enough. They stood like that until the candle burned low and sleep pulled at them both, then separated with the careful restraint of people who knew that once they started, stopping would be impossible. Eliza went to her bed by the girls, and Ethan to his behind the curtain, and the house settled into silence. But something had changed, Something had been spoken into existence that couldn't be taken back. And as Eliza drifted toward sleep, she thought about Clara's memorial in the grass behind the house, about Lila's arms around her neck in the flood, about May's quiet wisdom and Ethan's steady strength. She thought about home and what it meant to build one from ash and hope and the courage to try again. And for the first time in months, she let herself believe it might be possible. Morning came soft and golden, the kind of light that made promises feel possible. Eliza woke to the sound of Ethan already moving through the house, the familiar rhythm of coffee being made and the stove being stoked. She dressed quickly and emerged to find him at the table, studying a letter with a frown that carved deep lines around his mouth. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up, and something in his expression made her stomach tighten. "Letter came yesterday while I was in Cheyenne. Forgot about it with everything that happened." He pushed it across the table. "It's from a lawyer in town." Eliza picked up the paper, scanning the formal language until the meaning crystallized. Her blood went cold. "A petition," she said slowly. "Mrs. Calloway and 3 other women are petitioning the county to investigate the welfare of your daughters due to—" She stopped, throat closing around the words. "Due to the presence of an unmarried woman of questionable character residing in the household." That's what it says. "They're trying to take the girls. They're trying to make a case that I'm unfit." Ethan's voice stayed level, but his hands were clenched on the table. "County can't remove children without cause, but they can investigate. And if the investigator decides there's moral impropriety happening under this roof, there isn't. We know that. But appearances matter to people like Calloway, and she's got enough influence to make this ugly." He looked at her directly. "This is about you, Eliza. About us. They're using the girls as leverage to force you out." The truth of it settled like lead in her stomach. Of course they were. She'd defied them, stood her ground, refused to be shamed or pushed aside. And now they were coming at her through the children, through the one vulnerability she couldn't protect with sharp words and stubborn pride. "When's the investigation?" "Week from Monday. Investigators coming from the territorial office." Ethan's jaw worked. "We have 8 days to make this look proper by their standards. And how do we do that?" He met her eyes, and she saw the answer before he spoke it. "We get married." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them had been ready to voice the night before. Marriage. The thing the girls had asked about, the thing the town had been whispering, the thing Eliza had convinced herself didn't matter because they could build something without legal contracts or public declarations. But the world didn't work that way. The world required names and papers and vows spoken before witnesses. "That's not," Eliza's voice cracked. "Ethan, you can't marry me just to satisfy some busybody's idea of morality. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for May and Lila." He stood, crossing to where she stood, frozen by the table. "I'm doing it because I won't let those girls be taken from their home, because people are too small-minded to see what's right in front of them. But marriage, that's permanent. That's what I want." He said it quietly, firmly, like he'd been holding the truth back and finally decided to let it loose. "Not because of Calloway, or the petition, or any of that. Because when I think about the future, you're in it. You and the girls and this life we're building. I want that permanent." Eliza's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her skirt, trying to still the tremors. "I don't know if I can be someone's wife again. I failed at it once." "You didn't fail. You loved someone and lost them. That's not failure. That's grief." "I couldn't save my daughter." "Neither could I save Caroline." His voice roughened. "We've both lost people, Eliza. We've both got scars that won't ever fully heal. But standing here now, looking at you, I know something I didn't know before. I know that loving someone doesn't mean forgetting the people we lost. It means honoring them by choosing to keep living." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What if I can't do it right? What if I'm not enough for them?" "You already are." He reached for her hands, holding them between his own. "The girls love you. He stopped, swallowed. "I care about you more than I thought I'd ever care about anyone again. If you need more time, I understand. But if you're saying no because you're scared of not being enough, then you're wrong. You're more than enough." She looked at him through blurred vision, this hard, quiet man who'd given her shelter when she had nowhere to go,
who'd defended her to his neighbors, who'd stood beside her when the world tried to push her down. She thought about May and Lila, about their small memorial for Clara, about the way they looked at her like she hung the moon.
She thought about the house that had become home, the rhythms that had become routine, the life that had grown around her like vines finding purchase in stone. She thought about choice and what it meant to choose something instead of just accepting what was left. "Ask me properly," she whispered. His eyes widened. "What?" "If you want me to marry you, ask me. Not because of the petition or the town. Ask me because you mean it." Ethan's throat worked. He released her hands and stepped back, and for a terrible moment she thought he'd changed his mind. Then he dropped to one knee on the packed earth floor, looking up at her with an expression so open and vulnerable it made her chest ache. "Eliza Moore," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I don't have a ring to offer you, or pretty words or promises that life will be easy, but I can promise I'll stand beside you through whatever comes. I'll protect you and the girls with everything I have. I'll listen when you need to talk and give you space when you need silence. I'll try every day to be worthy of the trust you've given me." He paused, taking a shaking breath. "Will you marry me? Will you stay and build this life with us, not because you have to, but because you want to?" Eliza's vision swam. She dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his face between her hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." His arms came around her, pulling her close, and they knelt together on the floor while dawn light spilled through the window and turned everything gold. The girls found them like that, still holding each other, foreheads pressed together, breathing in tandem. Lila's squeal of delight shattered the quiet. "I knew it! May, I told you!" May was crying, happy tears streaming down her face as she threw herself at them both. "Does this mean Miss Eliza's staying forever?" Ethan looked at Eliza, letting her answer. "Forever," she said softly. "If you'll have me." "Of course we'll have you," Lila bounced on her toes. "Can we call you Ma now, or should we wait until after the wedding? How long do we have to wait? When's the wedding?" "Soon," Ethan said. "Very soon." They told the girls about the petition over breakfast, explaining in simple terms that some people in town didn't understand their family and needed official proof that everything was proper. The girls took it with surprising calm, Lila's face setting in mutinous determination, while May simply reached across the table and took Eliza's hand. "They can't take us away if you're our real Ma," May said. "That's how it works, right?" "That's how it works," Ethan confirmed. "Then we'll get married fast," Lila declared. "And if Mrs. Calloway tries anything after that, I'll tell her exactly what I think of her." "You will not," Eliza said firmly, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "We'll handle this properly and legally. No, giving the town more ammunition." They rode into Red Creek that afternoon, all four of them crowded into the wagon. The town watched with barely concealed curiosity as Ethan helped Eliza down in front of the courthouse, the girls trailing behind like solemn witnesses. Inside, the clerk was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from his ledger as they approached, eyes widening slightly at the sight of them. "Mr. Rowe," he said carefully. "What can I do for you?" "Need a marriage license," Ethan said, "for myself and Miss Moore here." The clerk's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "I see. Well, that's... Congratulations." He pulled out the proper forms, dipping his pen in ink. "I'll need some information from both of you." They answered his questions, names, ages, previous marriages. When he asked about Eliza's family, she said simply that she had none, and saw understanding flicker in the clerk's expression. He didn't press for details. "There's a 3-day waiting period," he said, blotting the forms. "But given the circumstances, if you can find someone willing to perform the ceremony, I can expedite the paperwork." "What circumstances?" Ethan's voice sharpened. The clerk flushed. Forgive me. I only meant that with the petition pending, it might be beneficial to formalize your union before the investigator arrives." "I'm not supposed to speak of such things, but..." He glanced at the girls. "It seems to me you're doing right by your family, Mr. Rowe. Some folks just can't see past their own prejudices." "Thank you," Eliza said quietly. "We appreciate your discretion." They left with the license and a list of the town's 3 ministers. The first two, when they called on them, made excuses. Too busy, calendar full, perhaps in a month or two. The message was clear. They wouldn't risk Calloway's displeasure by helping. The third was different. Reverend Michaels was an old circuit preacher who'd settled in Red Creek after 30 years riding between frontier towns. He lived in a small house behind the church, and when he opened the door to their knock, his weathered face creased into a smile. "Ethan Rowe," he said warmly, "been too long since I've seen you in services, and these must be your lovely daughters." His gaze shifted to Eliza. "And you, miss?" "Eliza Moore, Reverend. Soon to be Eliza Rowe, if you're willing to perform the ceremony." His eyebrows rose, but his smile didn't falter. "Is that so? Well, come in. Let's talk." They sat in his modest parlor while he served weak tea and listened to their story. Eliza expected judgment, prepared herself for questions about propriety and reputation. Instead, the Reverend listened with quiet attention, occasionally nodding, his eyes kind. "So you need a quick ceremony," he said when they'd finished, "before this investigation happens." "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "Ethan, I know how it looks. It looks like two people trying to protect their family from small-minded interference." Michael set down his cup. "I've been in this town long enough to know Margaret Calloway's type. Good-hearted in some ways, but convinced that her way is the only righteous path. She can't see that love and family come in many forms." "Then you'll do it?" Eliza asked. "I will. On one condition." He looked between them seriously. "I won't marry two people who are only doing it for convenience or appearances, so I need you to look me in the eye and tell me this is real. That you're choosing each other, not just a solution to a problem." Ethan reached for Eliza's hand. "It's real, Reverend. Maybe it started as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became more than that. I love her. I want her in my life and in my daughters' lives, legally and permanently." Michaels turned to Eliza. "And you, Miss Moore?" She met the old preacher's gaze steadily. "6 months ago, I walked into this town with nothing but ash and grief. This man gave me shelter. His daughters gave me purpose. Together, they gave me a reason to keep living when I'd forgotten why that mattered." Her voice strengthened. "I'm choosing them. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because they're my family now, and I'll fight anyone who tries to take that away." Michaels studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then, I'll marry you. How does Saturday sound?" "Saturday's perfect," Ethan said. "Good. Bring witnesses, come to the church at 10 o'clock, and we'll make it official." He stood, shaking both their hands. "And don't worry about Calloway. Once you're legally married, that petition won't have a leg to stand on." They left feeling lighter than they had in days. The girls chattered excitedly about the wedding, already planning what they'd wear and whether there'd be cake. Eliza let their voices wash over her, focusing on the solid warmth of Ethan's hand wrapped around hers. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted. "But in a good way. Does that make sense?" Perfect sense. That evening, after the girls were asleep, they sat together on the porch steps. The cicadas were singing their endless summer song, and heat lightning flickered on the horizon without ever bringing rain. "I need to tell you something," Eliza said, "about the fire, about Clara." Ethan waited, not pushing, just present. "It was my fault." The words came hard, scraping her throat raw. "I'd put her to bed and gone downstairs to finish mending. I had a candle burning too close to the curtains. I didn't notice until I smelled smoke, and by then," she stopped, breathing through the memory. "I tried to get to her room, but the stairs were already burning. The heat drove me back. I could hear her crying for me, and I couldn't reach her. Eliza, a neighbor pulled me out, held me back while the roof collapsed. They found her the next morning. Tears streamed down her face. If I'd just been more careful, if I'd stayed upstairs with her, if I'd noticed the candle sooner—" "Stop." Ethan's voice was firm but gentle. He turned her to face him, hands on her shoulders. "It was an accident, a terrible, heartbreaking accident, but it wasn't your fault. I was her mother. I was supposed to protect her. And I was Caroline's husband. I was supposed to save her from the fever, but I couldn't. I watched her slip away, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it." His eyes were bright with old grief.
We can't always protect the people we love, no matter how much we want to. Sometimes bad things just happen, and we survive them, and we carry the weight of that for the rest of our lives. How do you bear it? By keeping going, by finding new reasons to wake up in the morning. He cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears. You gave me that, Eliza. You and the girls together. You reminded me that life doesn't end just because part of your heart stops beating. There's still joy to be found, still love to be given. She leaned into his touch, letting herself be held by his certainty when her own felt shaky. I'm afraid I'll fail them. May and Lila, that I'll let them down the way I let Clara down. You won't. You can't know that. I can, because you've already proven it. He pressed his forehead to hers. You walked into a flooding creek to save Lila. You stood up to armed men to protect this family. You've given those girls more love and attention in 2 months than most children get in a year. You're not going to fail them, Eliza. You're going to be exactly what they need. And what about you? She whispered. What do you need? You, he said simply. Just you, exactly as you are. She kissed him then, tentative at first and then deeper, tasting salt and summer, and the promise of something new beginning. He pulled her closer, careful and reverent, like she was something precious that might break. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. 4 more days, he murmured. 4 more days, she agreed. They sat together until the stars came out, hands intertwined, planning a future that had seemed impossible just months before. Saturday dawned clear and hot. Eliza woke to find the girls already up and wearing their Sunday dresses, faces scrubbed and hair braided with uncharacteristic neatness. May had picked wildflowers and arranged them in a jar while Lila had somehow procured a ribbon for Eliza's hair. Where did you get this? Eliza asked, touching the blue silk. Traded Mrs. Henderson 3 eggs for it, Lila said proudly. She said every bride needs something nice to wear. Eliza's throat tightened. Thank you, sweetheart. It's perfect. She dressed in her best, a simple gray dress she'd mended until it looked almost respectable, with the blue ribbon woven into her braid. No veil, no elaborate preparations, just soap and water and the wildflowers May pressed into her hands. When she emerged, Ethan was waiting by the wagon. He'd shaved and wore a clean shirt and his only suit jacket, looking uncomfortable but determined. His eyes widened when he saw her. You're beautiful, he said quietly. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. He offered his hand. I'm saying it because it's true. They rode into town with the girls wedged between them, chattering nervously to fill the silence. A few people watched from doorways and windows as they passed, but no one called out or tried to stop them. The church was small and plain, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the morning sun. Reverend Michaels waited on the steps, wearing his ministerial robes and a gentle smile. Right on time, he said. Come in, come in. Inside, the sanctuary was cool and dim, sunlight filtering through simple windows. To Eliza's surprise, they weren't alone. A handful of townspeople sat in the pews, Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, the clerk from the courthouse, a young couple Eliza recognized from the mercantile. Not many, but enough to serve as witnesses. At the back sat Sheriff Crawford. He nodded to Ethan, his expression carefully neutral but not hostile. Friends of yours? Eliza whispered. People who know right from wrong, Ethan replied. They stood before Reverend Michaels, hands joined, while the girls sat in the front pew and tried to contain their excitement. The ceremony was simple and brief. No elaborate vows or lengthy sermons, just the essential promises spoken clearly. Do you, Ethan Rowe, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Eliza Moore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked at Ethan, at the strength in his face, the hope in his eyes, the steady certainty of him, and felt the last of her fear fall away. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Michael smiled. You may kiss your bride. Ethan's kiss was gentle and sweet, a promise and a beginning all at once. When they separated, the small congregation applauded, and the girls launched themselves at them both, squealing with delight. We have a ma, Lila announced to the whole church. A real, legal, official Ma. Eliza laughed, scooping both girls into her arms. Yes, you do. They signed the register with Michaels and the witnesses, making it official in ink and law. When they emerged from the church into the bright afternoon, Eliza felt different, lighter somehow, like she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Mrs.
Rowe, Ethan said, testing the name. Mrs. Rowe, she repeated, and smiled. The investigator came on Monday as scheduled, a stern-faced man from the territorial office with a clipboard and a checklist of moral requirements. He interviewed Ethan, then Eliza, then the girls separately. He inspected the house, examined the sleeping arrangements, asked pointed questions about their marriage and its timing. Eliza answered everything calmly, showing him the marriage certificate, explaining her role in the household, demonstrating through her steady composure that there was nothing improper or shameful about their family. When he interviewed May, she told him solemnly that Miss Eliza, no, Ma, had saved Lila from drowning and made the best bread and taught them their letters and read them stories every night. When he interviewed Lila, she informed him that anyone who thought their family wasn't proper was stupid and wrong and probably jealous, which made Ethan cough to cover a laugh and Eliza close her eyes in mortification. But the investigator's mouth twitched slightly, almost a smile. His report, delivered 2 weeks later, found no evidence of impropriety or neglect. The petition was dismissed. The girls would stay with their father and stepmother, and the county had no grounds for further intervention. Mrs. Calloway, they heard through the town grapevine, was furious, but there was nothing she could do. The family she'd tried to tear apart had become unbreakable. August slipped into September, the brutal heat finally breaking as cooler nights brought relief. The grass stayed gold and dry, but morning dew returned, and the light took on that slanting amber quality that meant summer was yielding to autumn. Eliza settled into her role as wife and mother with surprising ease. The girls dropped the miss from her name without being asked, calling her Ma as naturally as breathing. She and Ethan found a rhythm that worked, partnership in all things, affection shown in small gestures rather than grand declarations, a quiet intimacy built on shared work and shared purpose. At night, they lay together in the bed that had been only his, talking in low voices about the day's small victories and tomorrow's necessary tasks. He told her about Caroline sometimes, how she'd loved thunderstorms, how she'd sung off-key while cooking, how she'd made him laugh even when times were hardest. And Eliza told him about Clara, about butterfly hunts and bedtime stories and the fierce, pure love that had defined her too brief motherhood. They spoke about the people they'd lost, not as ghosts to be avoided, but as beloved memories to be honored. And in the speaking, they found a way to make room for both grief and joy, past and present, what was lost and what had been found. One evening in late September, Eliza stood in the tall grass behind the house, looking at Clara's memorial. The wildflowers had long since withered, but someone, probably May, had replaced them with fresh ones. The wooden cross still stood straight, and new stones had been added to the pattern, arranging themselves into something that looked almost like a heart. She heard footsteps behind her and felt Ethan's presence before he spoke. "The girls wanted to make it prettier," he said. "Hope that's all right." "More than all right." She leaned back against his chest, his arms coming around her waist. "I never thought I'd find peace with it. The guilt, the grief, I thought it would eat me alive. And now? Now I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think Clara would want me to keep living, to find joy again, to love these girls the way I loved her." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I think she'd be proud that I didn't give up. I know she would be." He kissed her forehead, "Just like I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to stay. For choosing this life when you could have kept running." "I wasn't brave. I was desperate." "Same thing sometimes." He smiled, a real smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look younger. "Come on, supper's probably burning." They walked back to the house together, his arm around her shoulders, the last light of day turning everything gold. Through the window, they could see the girls setting the table, Lila gesturing wildly while telling some story, and May listening with patient amusement. Home, Eliza thought. This was home. Not the place she'd left behind or the life she'd lost, but something new built from fragments and determination and the stubborn refusal to let grief have the final word. That night, after the dishes were washed and the girls tucked into bed, Eliza stepped onto the porch and looked out at the dark hills. The cicadas had gone silent, their summer song complete. Soon the cottonwoods would turn gold and the first frost would silver the grass, and another year would begin its slow turn toward winter. But for now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Ethan joined her, slipping his hand into hers. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Eliza thought about the question seriously, weighing the truth of it. She thought about the ash still faintly visible on one skirt she hadn't been able to completely clean, about the nightmares that still came sometimes, though less frequently now, about Clara, always Clara, the daughter-shaped hole in her heart that would never fully close. But she also thought about May's gentle wisdom and Lila's fierce joy, about morning coffee shared in comfortable silence and evening conversations that stretched long into the dark, about the way Ethan looked at her like she was both strong and precious, capable and cherished, about the life they were building together, not perfect, not without scars, but real and solid and theirs. "No," she said finally. "No regrets?" He squeezed her hand and they stood together on the porch of the house that had become theirs, while the night settled around them and the future waited, full of ordinary days and small miracles and the steady accumulation of moments that transformed strangers into family. Eliza Moore had walked into Red Creek carrying ash and grief and nothing else. But Eliza Rowe stood here now with a home, a family, and the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the only way through fire is to keep walking until you find someone worth standing still for. And she had found them, this quiet man and his brave daughters, this life built from dust and determination, this second chance she'd stopped believing she deserved. The summer heat was finally breaking, but inside the small house at the edge of Red Creek, Wyoming, warmth remained. The kind that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with choosing to stay, to fight, to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. Eliza had learned that home wasn't granted by law or blood or the passage of time. It was forged by choosing to remain when leaving would be easier, by showing up every day and doing the work, by loving people even when it terrified you, especially when it terrified you, because the alternative was to stop living entirely. And she had done enough of that. Now it was time to live. Standing on the porch at sunset, cicadas humming their final songs in the tall grass, Eliza understood at last what it meant to be home. Not the place you came from or the life you planned, but the people you chose and who chose you back. The ordinary days strung together like beads on a thread, forming something beautiful in their accumulated weight. She turned and went inside where her husband was banking the fire and her daughters were already dreaming, and closed the door gently behind her. The ash was still there, would always be there, woven into the fabric of who she'd become. But it no longer defined her. She had walked through fire once and barely survived. Now she stood in a house built of hope and hard work and second chances, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would never let it burn. This was her home, her family, her life. And she was staying.